Okay, this is talk number 20 in the Judgment Seat of Christ series. And so we were just in the middle of looking at the crowns that are mentioned. This is on the subject of the rewards and so forth that are going to be given at the judgment seat. And so I was looking at these 5 crowns that are mentioned in the New Testament. And of course, I strongly suspect that there are many more, but these are the 5 that are mentioned. And we can gain some insight from looking at these. So the third one is what's called the crown of righteousness. Now we hear about this from Paul. He's writing to Timothy. It's in 2 Timothy, and that letter is written shortly before Paul's death. Not only was he shortly to die, but he knew he was going to die soon because he was in prison awaiting imminent execution. So this is Paul writing at a very particular time of his life when he knew that he was going to be dying within days or weeks of writing this letter. And so here's what Paul has to say. I'd like to read out from 2 Timothy 4, 7-8.
I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing.
Okay, now this is slightly unusual, this verse, because here you have Paul speaking almost as if he's preempting his own judgment. It's almost as if he's declaring what's going to happen to him at the judgment. Now, did you notice that seems a little strange? Because we don't actually know what the judgment is going to be for ourselves. We don't know what grade we're going to get, do we? But it would appear from this that Paul has been given a revelation about his own personal position. And you'll notice in one of the other passages we looked at before, but we'll look at again, where Paul is concerned about losing his inheritance, being disqualified. That was written at an earlier time, a substantially earlier time. But this letter is written when I think he knows where he stands. Effectively, he's been given a kind of glance at his gradings. He knows where he stands. And he says, in the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me. See? So anyway, that's that. But what is this then, the crown that he's speaking of? And it would appear to be a crown that's going to be given to those who have loved the appearing of Jesus. And what does he mean by that? I think he means those who have looked forward longingly to Jesus' return. And so you might think that's a strange thing to give a reward for. Strange thing even to identify as something that you would want, that Jesus would want his followers to do. But do you ever notice that the things that Jesus specifies as wanting us to do are very frequently the things that we don't do? Have you ever seen that? And here's yet another thing that, broadly speaking, the church doesn't do. So it's not looking forward longingly to the return of Jesus Christ. There have been times in the church when that has been true, but this is not such a time. And so, broadly speaking, if you took 1,000 Christians and interviewed them closely, I think you'd find that the vast majority of them are not looking forward eagerly or longingly or even looking forward at all, or even thinking about the return of Jesus Christ. So, at any rate, this crown would appear to be given to those who are doing that. Why would it be given? I think because, not simply for looking forward, but because looking forward to his return has implications for the way that you live. So there are, what you might say, there are indirect consequences that flow from being a person who looks forward to his return. So in a certain sense, I would suggest the reward is being given because of the things that happen in the lives of people who look forward to his return. Because those who look forward to his return live and act and think and speak in a different way from those who don't. Because if on any given day you're thinking today could be the day when he returns, and moreover you want it to be the day, well, if you think that today could be the day and you want it to be the day, wouldn't you act differently if this was your last day and you knew it was? if each day was your last day and you thought it was and you hoped it was, wouldn't you live differently?
Yeah.
I think you would. So I would sense that the reward is perhaps given for that reason, because the people who think and live that way, their lives are different from those who live in a kind of, are floating. Their lives are sort of floating, and they're not thinking about or conscious of the return of Jesus Christ. And so whereas it's not a widespread feature of the church today, it ought to be. And if it was, things would be different.
Mm.
But the return of Jesus is very rarely spoken about or taught about, and I would suggest barely even registers as an issue in most of the churches in the West today, in the UK at least. The next crown is, and the fourth one, is the crown of life. So here we hear about this from James. Now James is Jesus' own physical half-brother. He's one of the natural sons of Joseph and Mary. So, would you like to read out from James 1:12?
Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him.
Okay, the crown of life, it's called. And look to whom it's given. He says it's to the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, tested effectively. And so, as you'll see with a number of these, with many of these, the ongoing theme seems to be about the long term, about persevering, about keeping going. It keeps cropping up. Enduring, persevering, overcoming, and so forth, with the strong emphasis on the long term. So if these were all track events or running events, most of these seem to be focusing on long distance running, don't they? It's not so much about sprints. It's about 1,500 metre plus, isn't it? 5,000 metre, 10,000 metre, marathon runs. This seems to be the prevailing emphasis of these things. And in a certain sense, that makes it harder. In some ways, it's easier to be faithful for a day, to do something brave, to do a specific thing, to just win the Victoria Cross for something. Can in some ways be somehow easier than persevering for 50 or 60 years and being faithful, staying true, staying honest, staying loyal, staying humble. That's a hard thing to do, to keep doing it and keep going. Persevering under trial, not giving in, not losing your hope, not losing your faith, not losing trust. So, this crown, the crown of life, is evidently given to those who persevere under difficult circumstances. Now, we also hear about this in the book of Revelation. So let's read out Revelation 2:10.
Do not fear for what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, so that you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Yeah. Now this is a little bit the other direction. This is talking about something slightly more short term. A sharp test of tribulation. But he's saying here, be faithful until death. So some of them are going to be cast into prison, they're going to be tested, they're going to have tribulation. But he's asking them to, this is Jesus directly speaking, saying, be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. So, these people appear to be getting this crown because they have been faithful and handling pressure, which most of us don't want, do we? And the fact is, most of us would rather not have pressure. But the point is that it is precisely through pressure, through the long-term dealing with pressure, tribulation, trials, difficulties, that crowns and rewards are to be won. So it's a little bit like saying, you want exam certificates, but you don't want exams. Do you see? Now how can you say,
I want qualifications, but I don't want exams. And then someone might say, well, I'd rather do it by continuous assessment. Well, if you want continuous assessment, that's even more exams, isn't it? You're going to continuous assessment is going to mean writing essays every week for 50 years, isn't it? But you can't get these rewards, it would seem, without having to face difficulty, overcome things, handle things, endure things, resist things, and so forth. So it's not necessarily a good idea to be praying for the avoidance of difficulty, testing and hardship and tribulation and problems, because you're effectively saying to God, don't ever put me in for any exams. Well, if you're saying to God, don't ever put me in for any exams, how are you going to get qualified? How are you ever going to pass anything? Do you see? Now, does that mean we want to be continually taking exams? No. I mean, what would your school days be like if they were just exams every day? That's not the way that they're done. But they must involve exams, and it would be wrong of us to look upon exams or tests or trials or hardship as if it was a departure from the norm, as if it was something that ought not to happen. In fact, it's meant to happen. It's part of the plan. So the things that happen at school in May and June, they're meant to happen, aren't they? Mock exams at Christmas are meant to happen. They're not some kind of aberration that ought not to be happening. They're supposed to happen. And they're supposed to happen within the Christian life. So, it would seem, I suspect, that more people are likely to receive these kind of crowns in countries in our own day where the real church is being persecuted, and from past centuries in Britain where the church used to be persecuted, perhaps back in the 16th and 17th centuries. But not, it would seem, in churches, in times and in places where there is no tribulation, no difficulty, nothing to overcome. So let's look at the fifth crown, the crown of glory. So if you could read out from 1 Peter 5, 1 to 4.
Therefore I exhort the elders among you, as your fellow elder and witness of the suffering of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sort of gain, but with eagerness, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory.
Okay, so this crown, the crown of glory, would seem to be given to those who are faithful leaders of God's people. Genuine shepherds, pastors, exercising genuine, faithful pastoral care and teaching, are the kind of person who's doing what they do, not from a desire for financial gain or to have power over people, but from a true shepherd's heart. Now, my personal, anecdotal, non-scientific perception of the situation is that that's not a very common thing, and that a depressingly high percentage of leaders, at least in the British church, don't seem, at least to me, to be coming within that category of genuine shepherds and pastors who are faithful leaders. There's too great, and especially this second thing, having power over people. There's a strong tendency for leaders to want to have power over people, to lord it over people. Less so for financial gain, I suppose, but there is that too. And in some places that's a major issue, the desire for financial gain. But I'd have thought a more widespread problem is wanting to lord it over people, wanting to have power over people, wanting to dominate, to control, to manipulate. And that's done for many reasons, but the fact is it's done in many places by many, many leaders. So at any rate, this crown, if anyone is a leader of any kind, because there are lots and lots of levels of leaders, then be faithful, be genuine. Do what you're doing to help the people that you're helping. Not to gain power over people, not to get money, but because they need to be helped and you've got the opportunity to do so. So we're to take that opportunity to help and lead and teach and shepherd and support others, because the chief shepherd is watching, and he's going to reward those who handle it well and do it well. Now, to what extent is this pressing upon the minds of leaders today? I'd have thought, I don't know what's in everybody's minds, but there appears to be no external evidence that this is pressing upon the minds of a lot of leaders today. I don't hear them talk about it. I don't hear them act in a manner that suggests that this is on their minds. And based on that, I form the conclusion that it's most probably not on their minds, but it should be. And again, as is so often the case, the things that we're told to think about, the things we're told to be focused upon, are not the things that we're thinking about or being focused upon. You'd imagine from time to time that the things that the Bible says would be the very things that we are focused upon, but it very rarely seems to be the case. So, those are the 5 crowns. Let's move on to another thing now, a specific reward or honour, which Jesus himself refers to as the morning star. Now, this is mentioned in Revelation, and it's also mentioned elsewhere, but it would appear that this reward, whatever it is, will be given to those who hold fast what they have until Jesus comes, who conquer and who keep his works to the end. And it says that Jesus will give them authority over the nations, which I take to be a reference to him allowing them to have positions of authority and power during the millennium and possibly beyond the millennium in the eternal state. And speaking of such people, Jesus says that they'll be given the morning star. So he doesn't explain what this is, what that honour consists of. But we have 1 or 2 places where it's spoken about. So let's read firstly from Revelation 22:16.
I, Jesus, have sent my angel to you with this testimony for the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright morning star.
Now in this particular verse, Jesus describes himself as the bright morning star. And let's read another verse, Revelation 2:25-28.
But hold fast what you have till I come, and he who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him I will give power over the nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron. They shall be dashed to pieces like the potter's vessels, as I also have received from my Father, and I will give to them the morning star.
So, in the first verse we looked at from Revelation 22:16, Jesus appears to be describing himself as the morning star. In this second passage from Revelation 2:25-28, he's speaking of giving them the morning star. And I know of only 2 other references to the morning star in the scriptures, but neither of them really help to clarify exactly what the reward would consist of. But nonetheless, the 2 passages are from Job and Isaiah. So could you read out from Job 38:7?
While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy.
And then from Isaiah 14:12.
How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations.
Okay. So we're not told, at least I can't see, any definition or description of exactly what this reward is exactly, except insofar as it speaks of being given authority. But we're not told what it is, the morning star. But those 2 passages refer to angels. The second one refers to what we now call Satan, being the morning star, a morning star. So I don't know exactly what a morning star or the morning star is, but I do know this, that I'd like to receive that honour and reward. I'd like to be given it without quibbling about its definition. So if I'm awarded it, I shall not raise a point of order to demand a definition of it. I shall just receive it and then seek a definition afterwards. That's what I'll do if I ever get one. So, in the passage from Revelation 2, you'll notice that it speaks about, he shall rule them with a rod of iron. Now that's speaking about Jesus himself. He shall rule. But he's also speaking about allowing others to rule. So it would appear that he's going to allow these people to rule with him, under him. So in some sense or other, they're going to be given authority. And that, again, is a consistent theme that we see on other occasions, this granting of authority and rulership. Now, the implication of that, it seems to me, it can't be something that everybody can just assume that they're going to get automatically, because whenever on those very, very rare occasions where I hear people ever speaking about rewards or ever hearing anyone say anything about judgment, which isn't often, but on the rare occasions I've ever heard it, there is always an assumption made that the rewards are for everybody and are just going to be given out almost automatically for turning up. So for turning up at the judgment seat, you will just automatically be given these rewards. Well, I don't think there's any basis that I can see in any of the things I've looked at so far that can give you any reason for thinking that there's an automaticness about them. On the contrary, the exact opposite is implied, that these things are given out to those who deserve them, to those who've earned them, to those who warrant them. And the implication is that it's the minority for every one of these. Certainly the implication is that it's by no means guaranteed. That's to put it extremely conservatively. But more than that it's the minority that will get these things. And we can't all be in high positions of authority in the kingdom. Otherwise, who are we going to be an authority over? If everybody's a field marshal walking around with a baton, well, who are they going to be in charge of? Do you see? Yeah. And so it just, common sense tells you that these positions of high authority, whatever they might be, must be awarded to a minority. And so I think that's true certainly of the bigger and greater rewards. But even perhaps of the lesser ones, there can be no assumption of automaticness about it, that you've just got to show up, you've just got to turn up, and you're going to get an A star, or definitely an A, or at least a B plus, just for showing up. So, those are the 5 crowns we've mentioned, and the morning star. But as far as I can see, one of the facts about the New Testament is that the information given about these rewards is very sparing. That's to put it mildly. We're told far less than I'd like to be told. My hunch is that there are far more rewards of far many different types and levels and so forth, way beyond what we've been told about. So if you were only to look at the British, rewards and honours system, even our honours system is vastly more complicated than what we've just spoken about. And so I can't assume that what we've been told about in the New Testament is the entirety of the reward system. I think there's going to be many other levels and rewards that we're not told anything about that we'll find out about. Because even in this country we have peerages and knighthoods and different kinds of medals. So even within getting a peerage, you could be a baron or a marquis or a viscount or an earl or a duke. And if you get a knighthood, it's different levels. And then there's medals given like the OBE and CBE and MBE and other medals. And how many of you know exactly what all of those are? Probably don't. What levels they're at. Who gets them? Why do they get them? But one thing we do know, they're not given out willy-nilly, are they? So our own honour system, the very least you can say, is given to a minority. My suspicion is that the rewards that are given out at the judgment seat will be along similar lines. Perhaps there are going to be lesser rewards that will be more broadly, widely given out. But these major ones, I think, are going to be rare. But one thing's for sure, I want to get as many as I can. I want to be a duke, and I want to have Chatsworth House to live in, and I want to get the best I can get, and we need to speak openly about that and not be ashamed of saying so. So why then is the judgment seat of Christ so widely ignored and forgotten about? Because to me it seems obvious that we should give it high priority. It's just self-evidently obvious that it's important and we would want to have it and we want to do well at it. But the reality is, as with so many other important things, we don't really talk about it or think about it or take it seriously or consider it. But that contrasts markedly with the way that we and the world think about other problems. So I'm reminded of a client I used to have in my old law firm. And this particular client, one of my staff acted for him. And he got into trouble at a football match where he was wrongly arrested, a mistake of identity. And he was perfectly innocent. He hadn't done a thing wrong. He just mistook him for someone else. And the police arrested him wrongfully. And not only having done that, they then assaulted him badly, very badly, and then falsely accused him. So they realised they'd got the wrong man. But in order to avoid being complained about, they followed it through by prosecuting him, and they made up evidence about him to wrongly convict him. Now, he had to face a trial over this. He was a totally innocent person just going to a football game, hadn't done a thing wrong. He was just walking back after it, and someone hit him in the face, and then the next minute he was arrested and then given an assault by the police. Now, the point is, he was being prosecuted for something he'd never done. And he had to wait about a year before this came to court. It was very protracted. During that time, he was anxious about going to this court hearing. That was the criminal court hearing. Now, think about it. Why was he apprehensive and anxious about that? The worst that could happen to him is he would be given a fine and a criminal conviction in this life, and he was about 35 years old, so it was only going to last about 40 years, and then that would be gone. So why was he anxious about that?
Because it was his character.
Of course. I mean, he's right to be anxious. I'm not arguing against being anxious. He's right to be anxious. What I'm speaking of is the anomaly, that he was anxious about that, whereas we are not anxious about the judgment seat and are not giving it thought. Not a day went by without him thinking about this trial he was facing. And then afterwards, when he was successful at the trial, the court threw it out. We then sued the police for wrongful arrest, false imprisonment, assault, and so forth. And we were successful and got damages for him. But even in relation to that, he showed some anxiety because he was having to go to trial about that. Now, the point is that he was concerned about going before a judge and being tried. But the little judge that he was going to go against was just a little pipsqueak of a diddly squat judge, wasn't he? Compared to the judge that we're going to go in front of. So he had 100 units of anxiety about going in front of a little 1-unit judge. We've got at most 1, perhaps 0 units of anxiety about going in front of a 1,000,000-unit judge. Do you see? So that's the anomaly that I'm drawing attention to. There is a disconnect. The wires aren't connecting. The electricity is not getting through. So the pages of the Bible speak about these things, but the wires from the Bible to us are not joined. The electricity isn't flowing from the Bible to us to get us for the light bulb to go on in your head. Do you see? So the page, nothing wrong with the Bible's pages. These words are on the pages of the Bible, but when you connect the Bible to yourself, the light bulb isn't going on in people's heads. Does that make sense? And it ought to be. It ought to be. Because in contrast to this client who was anxious about these 2 little hearings, most of the church is entirely apathetic about, unaware of, and even in the event that they're made aware, continue to be apathetic about this judgment. And yet, in contrast to him, he would have, at worst, he would have had to face being wrongly convicted for about 40 years, and then he would have died, and then his conviction would have not been on him anymore. Now, he was anxious about that, but we face an outcome, for good or ill, that will last forever. So if you get made a duke at the judgment seat, I don't suppose there will be any dukes, but if you got made the equivalent thereof, you're going to be that forever. If you get made a parish councillor, you'll be a parish councillor forever. And if you get made dog catcher or something, you'll be dog catcher forever. Or whatever you're made, that's what you'll be forever. Now, can you see why that ought to animate you? That ought to make you think each day as you wake up, how much is going into my savings account today? How's my portfolio doing? Do you see? And that's what ought to be happening. So, with this client, I mean, he had been given trial dates and they sometimes got adjourned and so on. You might think, well, if I had a trial date, I'd be concerned then. If I was given a trial date, well, you have been given a trial date. It's what's technically called, the trial of you has been, the technical expression, it's been adjourned sine die. That's what you say in Latin. And so your trial has been adjourned sine die for a date to be fixed. And so that's a common expression which you would come across. So you know there's a trial coming on your client's file, but it's been perhaps adjourned for a date to be fixed. Well, our trial has been adjourned for a date to be fixed. But that doesn't mean that there's no trial coming. It's coming. But you just don't know the day. Now that day, who knows when that day is? It could be this evening, couldn't it? Or it might not be for 50 years, or it could be whenever. But you have got a trial. So, why then is there such a lack of knowledge, a lack of interest, a lack of concern about the judgment seat? Here are some possible thoughts. Why isn't it spoken about? Why isn't it mentioned? One reason, that there is a general famine of hearing the word of God. So I would say the absence of teaching on this is not unique. There is an absence of teaching on just about everything that matters. So in most churches, the teaching is limited to perhaps 5 or 10% of the Bible. The things that can be spoken about without causing offence, without having to do detailed study, without having to work too hard, and so forth. So there's a famine of hearing the word of God anyway. The Bible isn't taught adequately or properly. Number 2, many leaders and pastors don't know the Bible well enough themselves to be able to teach about it because they don't know it. And I know that. I speak from experience because I've raised it with leaders and they don't know about this. And so I haven't raised it with every leader in the United Kingdom, but I've raised it with enough to be able to form what I would consider to be a reasonably statistically reliable anecdotal assessment. In fact, I've never really come across any leaders who do know about it. Third reason, many leaders wouldn't want to teach on judgment, and therefore they choose not to do it, even if they do know about it, because they fear that it would make them unpopular. They'd lose members if they taught about this. And they may be right. They would lose some people. They'd also gain some people. But the point is, if you're a leader or if you're an anybody, whether saying something from the Bible results in more people coming to your church or fewer, whether it results in you being popular or unpopular, whether it makes people approve of you or disapprove of you, is utterly irrelevant. It's completely and totally, absolutely a non-issue. Now that doesn't mean that you are to go around wanting to be unpopular, wanting to offend, wanting to cause people to leave the church. Of course not. What I'm saying is, what you say needs to be based only on what does the Bible actually say. And find out what it actually says and then say that, without regard to the impact it may have on other people's assessment of you. because other people's assessment of you in this context is of no relevance. Of course, it's relevant in other contexts. So if people disapprove of you because you're horrible and mean and stingy and rude and ignorant, well then that matters very, very much. But if they disapprove of you because you preach the Bible faithfully and don't compromise and tell them exactly what the Bible says, their disapproval then is not a matter that you ought to have in mind. In any case, not to have in mind as a reason not to speak. It might be that you'll regret the fact that you're unpopular, but notwithstanding that you might regret it, it must not constrain you. Fourth reason, why don't people talk about it? Why don't leaders speak? Because many, many leaders exist within a denominational setup. They have a hierarchy. If they spoke about these things, they'd be venturing into a new kind of territory that their denomination doesn't speak about. They'd be going out on a limb. They'd be speaking sort of off message. It'd be a bit like a politician speaking off message, because what do politicians get? They get, these days, politicians get little messages to their mobiles each day telling them what to talk about. So today we're talking about whatever, and that's what you're to talk about. And so a politician that's talking about something else is going to be considered to be, not doing it right. And so within a hierarchy, within a denominational setup, there is a pressure on leaders to toe the line, to do the normal thing, to fit in, and to talk about the things that you're supposed to talk about. And what do? They tend to deliver feel-good messages. They also tend to copy what they hear others doing. So there's a tendency just to get your messages from other men, from what they're talking about. And so you just find out what other men are talking about and then talk about that. So it's very incestuous, and that's not the right way. What you're meant to do is go to the Bible, find out what the Bible's saying, and then talk about that, irrespective of any other consideration. So, another reason why men don't talk about the judgment seat, this is perhaps a minority one, but I've come across a man who told me this, and so therefore it certainly exists, and it's a fear that if they spoke about the judgment seat for Christians, there would be confusion in some people's minds, and that they would think, perhaps, that justification is on the basis of works rather than faith. Now, this particular man told me, if I spoke about that, some people would get confused, and they would think that we're going to be judged on the basis of our works. I don't want people to think that justification is by works, so therefore I don't talk about it. Now, when this man told me this is what he said. I don't quite believe him. I think he has other reasons why he doesn't talk about it, which belong more in the first four categories. But if we take him at his word, let's imagine that he didn't belong in the first four categories, and that was his true reason. It would still be completely invalid, because a person is capable of misunderstanding anything you say. If you spoke about repentance, if you spoke about, you name it, if you spoke about anything, a person is capable of misunderstanding the Trinity. A person is capable of misunderstanding Jesus being fully man and fully God at the same time. What is there that a person isn't capable of misunderstanding? I would say nothing. There's nothing at all in the Bible that isn't capable of being misunderstood. But that's not an argument for not talking about repentance or the Trinity or the divinity of Jesus or the manhood of Jesus or whatever. So even in the event that that was his actual reason, which I doubt, it's an invalid reason. So the potential to be misunderstood is not a reason to not speak. It's a reason to speak clearly, isn't it? And so the onus is on you not to avoid speaking, but to speak in the right way. So, what are some of the mistakes then that preachers make, further mistakes that they make about the judgment seat? Talking now about leaders. One mistake is thinking that judgment is only for unbelievers. This is very widely believed. So that the word judgment creates a kind of mental attachment to the word unbeliever. So judgment and unbeliever go together, like, apple pie and custard. You just put the two together. They go together, judgment and unbeliever. Now, that's not the case. Unbelievers will be judged, but so will believers. So it's inappropriate to speak of judgment and unbeliever as if those two things went together uniquely, and judgment doesn't go together with anything else. Judgment goes with everybody. The only question is, what kind of judgment and where? What court are you going to? Do you see? Are you going to the Crown Court to be tried on a criminal charge? Or are you going to the Employment Tribunal to be assessed on matters relating to your employment status or conduct? Do you see? Now, the Employment Tribunal is not a criminal court. You can't get a conviction out of an Employment Tribunal. But you can get a judgment. And you can be assessed and found wanting. You can be assessed and found to have acted very badly. But that's not a criminal court, do you see? So nonetheless, the decision they arrive at is known as a judgment. Now, the judgment seat of Christ is not an employment tribunal. The analogy I was seeking to make is this, that we think of judgment at the great white throne for unbelievers as being the only kind of judgment there is. But it is not. It's one kind of judgment for what I suspect, I'm pretty certain, is the overwhelming majority of humanity at the great white throne. But the other judgment, where a believer would want to be, is the judgment seat of Christ, but that is also a judgment. So, the idea that judgment is only for believers, only for those who are going to the lake of fire, therefore no relevance to Christians, is widely held. But there are many who don't even think that unbelievers will be judged. So that's an increasingly widely held view. Now, that wasn't the view 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago. 200 years ago, virtually everybody in this country believed in God, believed in judgment, believed in hell, believed in eternal life, even whether they were believers or not. They still believed in these things. But now, even amongst believers, Christians, or at any rate those who purport to be, there is not a universal belief in these things. So many, many leaders don't believe that even unbelievers will be judged. So one of the phrases you hear is, God is too loving to judge anybody. So have you noticed how people take it upon themselves to tell God what he's like? You see? Now, he has written us a very lengthy memorandum telling us what he's like. It's not our place to set aside what he's written and then tell him what he's like. But when we do that, if we say, well, God's too loving to judge anybody, what we're effectively doing is calling him a liar, setting aside his word, revoking or negating that, ignoring that, and substituting in its place our own word for what we think he's like. And no one ever puts that into words. No one ever says, I'm going to put aside God's word and set in its place my own word, setting out what I think. Nobody says that. But that's what's being done. So when we say God's too loving to judge anybody, well, he doesn't say so. So the idea that love and judgment can't go together is a wrong idea. God is loving, God is love, but at the same time he's told us that he's going to judge. So what can we deduce from that? That being loving and being a judge are not contradictory or mutually exclusive things. They are perfectly capable of being done by the same God. The one doesn't contradict or preclude the other. And it's not our place to redefine God, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously, whether we do it intentionally or unintentionally. We're not to redefine him. And you might say, well, redefining God, that's what's done by other people. That's what's done by people in other churches. Well, be careful, because we're all potentially capable of redefining God. And what do you find that most of these redefined gods are like. They are very, very similar to the person who's redefining him. And so the God that is created bears an uncanny resemblance to the person speaking about him. He holds all the same opinions, he has all the same priorities, and he thinks all the same things as that person does. I've seen this so many times. It's almost all the time. That's how it works out. And we need to be careful that we're not doing that, because we're capable of that. And so what do you have to do? You have to see what's on the page, not what's in your mind, what's in your database, what's in your own database for what you think things mean. Go to each page of the Bible as if you've never seen it before. Every time you turn the page of the Bible, you should pretend you've never seen it before. And you're saying, what's this? Even if it's something you've read 50 times. Okay, let's ask another question. Is it right to want to be praised and rewarded by Jesus at the judgment seat of Christ? Now, ordinarily, we apply human thinking to this question. And we think to ourselves, well, that doesn't sound good day to day. We don't like people who go around wanting to be praised all the time. We think that is a bad thing. And so, therefore, it must be a bad thing to want to be praised by Jesus at the judgment seat. But the point is, if God has chosen to set up an honours system, and if he speaks as he does, fairly frequently, not quite as frequently as I would like him to speak about it, but frequently about the honours system that he's set up, then who are we to tell him that we disagree with or disapprove of his honours system that he has set up? It'd be like writing to the Queen and saying, look, I'm not a fan of this peerage system, you know, and I'm not a fan of knighthoods, and I don't like all these medals you give out. Do you see? Well, how much more silly would it be to write God an email telling him how much you disapprove of his honours system? Who are we to disagree with him or disapprove of him? And yet there is a kind of unspoken disapproval of this. How do we know that? Because there's a kind of unease or a sort of squeamishness about openly stating that you're wanting rewards. It's considered a bit bad form, as if it's not good. And so even to the extent that anyone even thinks about this at all, which isn't much, there is a tendency to think that you should not actively seek rewards, but just passively wait and hope that they might happen. Or not even hope, just find out whether. So just passively hope that there might maybe be something, who knows, but not something to think about or concern yourself with, or be actively seeking to bring about. Well, that doesn't fit with the whole way that it's described in the New Testament. Because when these things are spoken about, they're spoken about for the very purpose of motivating us. So insofar as we say that it's squalid or sordid to be motivated by these things, we're effectively accusing God of being squalid and sordid, because it's his idea and he's the one urging us to be motivated.
I think it's a false humility.
A false humility, yes. There's an element of that, isn't there? So at the very least it's wrong thinking. But it may well be that the motivation behind it is a false humility. So by pretending that you don't actually want anything, pretending that you aren't looking for anything, because you hear people sometimes say, well, all I want is just to be there, just to get to heaven is enough for me. Well, that's not, I don't undermine or belittle getting to heaven. I very much want to get there. But I would never say that just getting there is enough for me. Because it's a silly thing to say. It's certainly false humility to say that. But at any rate, it's also contradicting Jesus. It's saying that you don't agree with him. In a sense, it's actually rebuking him, because you're telling him that he shouldn't have been making it something to motivate us. He should never have set up that incentive scheme. He did wrong to do it. So, should we then desire for reward? Should they be one of the factors that motivate us to seek to please God and obey his word? Well, let's look at what Nehemiah did. On page 136. Let's read out from Nehemiah 13, verse 14.
Remember me for this, O my God, and do not blot out my loyal deeds which I have performed for the house of my God and its services.
Now that's Nehemiah. He's talking there about himself. Now, look at the way Nehemiah speaks. He's asking God, he's reminding God about the things he's done and asking God not to blot out his loyal deeds, which I have performed for the house of God and its services. So he's asking God, he wants to be rewarded and remembered, and he wants to be approved of, and he doesn't want God to forget about the things he's done. Now, how many of us would approve of Nehemiah for speaking like that? Wouldn't many of us feel a sort of sense of disapproval? But there isn't an element of that in the text. So God never expresses any disapproval of Nehemiah for speaking that way. So my suggestion is, and I try to go out of my way to tell people, like when I told you I want to be a duke. Well, that's only half a joke. I want to get as high a place as I can get, and I want to be in charge of as much as possible, and I want to have a very major portfolio of investments in the kingdom. I like to have treasure and crowns and rewards and honours and medals and all sorts of stuff, and I want to have as much as I can get. And it's important to speak like that because, first of all, it shocks people a bit.
It does.
But secondly, it causes them to think about it and say, hang on a minute, why do I disapprove of that? Because they're confusing it with saying all of that about seeking treasure in this world. Because Jesus told us not to do that, not to seek for treasure in this world, but to seek it in the next world. And the confusion comes from twisting round his words. He told us not to seek it in this world, but to seek it in the next. And what we're saying is we should not seek it in the next. Yeah?
In Nehemiah 5:19,
Yeah.
to think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people.
Nehemiah 5:19, yeah, another one. What a big head Nehemiah was. But the point is, there's not a word of rebuke from God to him. And God doesn't say, hey, what are you doing, Nehemiah? I don't like the sound of it. But you think, well, would God disapprove or speak his disapproval if he did disapprove? Yes, he would. Because God includes within the pages of the Bible all sorts of bad school reports about people like David and Peter and others. They get bad school reports and they get published in the Bible, don't they? Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say you've really spoken to me today,
All right.
because I've been a Christian for 8 years and
Yeah.
I'm very much in the world, got all the qualifications you can get,
Yeah.
reward in terms of certificates and
Yeah.
whatever. And when I became a Christian, I didn't want to do any of that.
Mm.
So I just wanted to stop
Yes.
in this, worldly pursuit of rewards.
Mm.
And I've had that false humility, I guess, pointed out to me just now because of being in the world and seeing it that way. I don't want to achieve anymore.
Yes.
Actually, that's how I felt.
Yes.
And probably still do to a certain extent, but you've really sort of I just wanted
Yes.
to pop that in.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much.
I have to go home and think about that one.
Well, yes, I think we do need to think about it. We do, because what you were saying there was, just for the sake of the tape, you probably did pick up, but just in case, that you've passed all sorts of exams, and when in the secular sense, but when you became a Christian, you didn't want to be pursuing achievements and in that sense. Well, the point is this: we're not to seek for treasure in this life; we are to seek for it in the next. And what have we done? What have most of us done? We've switched Jesus' instructions. So we do seek for treasure in this life. Most people are doing that. And we are not seeking for treasure in the next life. That's true of most people. I've got a beckoning person over there telling me to stop talking. So what I'm going to do is stop there, and we'll pick things up at the next talk. Thank you.